Okay, so last day for students is May 8th. May 15th, the following Friday, is the deadline to turn in student work. Okay, so even after May 8th, you'll still have time to get something in. Now, you want to talk to your individual instructors about what that deadline means, but May 15th will be the very, very last day. And I think the reason that we're having to deal with that is so many students have to deal with paper packets and getting them turned in. And it just gives us as teachers time to deal with the packets that are coming in, will be coming in even next week. Your grades are due May 18th. So this is a note for us as teachers. So for all of you, I've got to have your grades finally posted by May 18th. And I'm just going to be real honest with you. I have been honest with you all year long. I'm going to be real honest with you now. As a school system, we have decided that NTI work will not cause your grade before we went out on NTI to go down. It can only help you. It can only help it go up. Okay. So,
wait.
So take a deep breath there and relax. And honestly,
Gracie.
Can you hear me? Sorry.
I think there's been a whole lot of discussion about this. And I'll just say that your grade can't go down from when we left. Okay. It can only go up. And so some of you were sitting right on the borderline of the A-B world. And so whatever you had when you left is locked in. And whatever you've turned in since then will only help you go up. And I think in all of your cases, what I've looked at, you're all going to be fine.
So, like, just say, hypothetically, we've got some projects to do. If we, I would definitely do them and work very hard on them. But if someone were to not do them, they can't necessarily get discredited for not doing them. Okay. Hypothetically, of course.
Okay. I don't know how to answer hypothetical questions. What I'm going to say is you'll have to deal with what it means not to turn something in to your individual teachers. But I'll just say,
Gracie, I don't think Mr. Bailey is going to care at all. So
you don't think? I hope
not. My suggestion is this. Turn in the best that you can on every assignment, especially for these AP and dual credit classes. Now, here's the rub for the classes that are dual credit. I don't think that standard applies.
Oh.
AP Lit is a dual credit class also, right?
You're right.
Do the 8th in there.
And so the standards for those classes, you'll have to talk to your instructor about what it means for dual credit.
Yeah.
Okay. Now,
dang it.
My suggestion is this: turn in the best that you can turn in. Okay. And I'll leave it at that. Okay. But literally, I'm reading directly from the notes that we got today on our math department meeting, and all the other departments are getting the same set of notes. NTI work cannot lower a student's grades, only raise it. AP classes follow this same policy. Dual credit requirements may be more stringent. Okay, so to answer your question, hypothetically, not even hypothetically, directly, I want you to turn in something for everything you've been assigned in a dual credit course.
Well, there's just this essay that I really don't want to do, but
Gracie, he said the essay you have to turn that in
Yeah,
because
to
it counts
Blackboard.
for Blackboard. It
right.
counts
I
for Skype.
forgot about that.
Is this the essay about how my life is going to be better in the future and all
No,
of that?
that
that's
one was
the-
really fun.
That's the future, past, present, whatever project. But
Yeah.
there's this essay where we have to like pull characters from previous books we've read and like
Oh my gosh! Yes.
apply. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey.
We went through that, and I'll tell you, it's a challenging thing. I don't think you can just not turn that in.
You should send Romano's copy over to me, and I'll double peer check it.
Me too. I'll help him out.
Yeah, well, I tell you what, you got Romano's contact information. You just go. You just go do what you need to do.
All right.
That one, okay. And so now let me ask you this: does anybody on the call here have crap in your locker that you want out? Did you clean out your locker before you left?
I think I have a few binders.
Yeah, same.
Okay, so here's what's going to happen. The custodians are going through lockers and they're putting all the contents in individual bags, and they're numbering the bag. If you had locker number 897, then probably not Monday the 4th, but the Monday after that, you can go by, or sometime the week of the 4th, you can go by the office and request that it get to pick it up, and they'll just bring you a bag that has everything in it. Okay. But if you don't go pick it up, it'll get tossed out, just like always. I mean, so that we want you to be aware of. If you do have stuff in your locker, then let me know. And honestly, if there's something in there to you, if you ask real nicely, maybe I'll go and get it for you. Your locker number is. But anyway, stuff in your lockers will be available to you if you're interested. Now, the last thing that you probably are most interested in, what about graduation? I don't know. I'm being 100% honest with you. I don't know what the graduation plan is. I do know there is a graduation plan, and it is currently being reviewed by the local health officials, whoever they are. I don't know who they are, to make sure that we're meeting all of the state's requirements. But I would say this: if you don't already have a mask, you should get one. If you want to personalize and decorate your mask, now's a good time to do that. Okay? For whatever it's worth. I wish I had mine on it. Anyway, that's it. That's all I literally know. It's not all I can tell you because I'm holding something back. It's literally all I know. But this should be an encouragement to you that you may need a mask for graduation, whatever ceremony we're going to go through. Okay. So I don't know what it is, but the good news is it doesn't sound like nothing. Okay. Are we going to pile into Diddle Arena with all 25 of your brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles? Probably not. But it does sound like there's going to be something in person, but I don't know what that is. So just stay tuned. We'll roll it out. Mr. Spears assured us today we'll roll it out as soon as we possibly can. But if you got a mask, you want to decorate it, now's a good time. If you don't got a mask, get you a mask. Okay? Fair enough? That's all I know. The other thing we talked about in our PLC meeting is how difficult this has been for all of us. And it's been difficult for me. Every day when I see your faces or I see your ceiling fan or I see your senior picture, it reminds me how much I miss you guys. I really do. I don't think you understand how important it is to us as teachers. But it is. And someday we'll get together and we'll celebrate. Whenever that is, we'll celebrate. As soon as we possibly can, I promise you. Because I've missed you. I really, really have. Okay, that's enough of that. Let's talk stats. Unless y'all got questions. Anybody got questions about dates? Good. Feel free to contact me. And honestly, if you do want me to try to sneak in the school and clear out your locker, I'll do that. But custodians are going to do it. It will be available. You just have to go by the school and pick it up. That's all I can say. All right. Okay, so let's pick up where we left off yesterday. Not where we left off yesterday. I think this is the last slide that we talked about yesterday, and I want to give you some more information about what it means for a result to be statistically significant. Because the word significant here has the connotation important. It's not what this means here. It really means, and honestly, I wish if I were to write a textbook, I wouldn't use this term, except it's so commonplace in statistical jargon. It really means statistically unlikely to happen just by chance. Okay, so statistically significant, you can just replace significant with it's unlikely to happen just by chance. Okay, so when we say that we get a statistically significant result, we get a result that is unlikely to happen just by chance. And as we go through our discussion from here on out, when you hear me say the words statistically significant, just be thinking in the back of your mind, okay, this is a result that is unlikely to occur just by chance. And so when we find a p-value that is less than this significance level, whatever it is, this significance level alpha, it's really like the level of pain we're willing to endure in order to get to where we want to be. And so if the p-value is less than that event or that result is so unlikely that we say we're not going to worry about that. It could occur. The possibility or the probability of it occurring is not zero, but it's so low as not to be to be considered. And let me give you this analogy. You're familiar enough with our criminal justice system as to how it works, and this is a similar analogy. When someone is accused of committing a crime, they can go through. They can be brought to trial based on a modest amount of evidence. And so that whole trial process is really this idea of what we're trying to do here. Okay, so the amount of evidence that caused that person to be arrested and brought charges against, that's the null hypothesis. That's what that's the claim we believe to be true. But the trial by jury process is the process of calculating, going through this significance test to see if there is evidence in favor of another alternative. And if there is evidence in favor of another alternative, we have to say the defendant is not guilty. We never ever say the defendant is innocent. We just say the defendant is not guilty. And that's the conclusion that we're going to draw here. If our p-value is greater than or equal to alpha, if our p-value is, say that our significance level is 5%, and the p-value that we calculate is greater than 5%, we never say that we never say that the null hypothesis is true. We just say that we can't find any other alternative that makes sense, and therefore we can't reject it. And so it's similar to that trial by jury process, and the process of calculating going through the significance test is a lot like that jury weighing all of the evidence to see what happens. Okay, if there is, if the p-value is really, really low, what that means is if the null hypothesis is true, then the result that we got from this sample or experiment is so unlikely to occur that it is less than 5% or 1%, whatever we want. And so there's reason to believe that there is another explanation. That's when the p-value is low. When the p-value is high, that result occurred pretty often, or can occur pretty often, just by random chance, and therefore there is not strong evidence against that null hypothesis. Now, I'll confess to you, speaking in arbitrary and generic terms about these things is a bit confusing, and I think the way to get through this is for us to talk through several examples, and that's what I'm going to spend the rest of our time on today, is just going through a few examples. So let's talk about this example of AAA batteries. We've all dealt with AAA batteries, and we know that they have a finite life. And so here's our example. I knew I had my wrong glasses on. So we've got a AAA battery design that's supposed to last longer than a regular battery. However, they're more expensive, and so we want to be sure that they really do last longer. So the regular batteries last 30 hours because we've used them for a long time. We've done a lot of testing, and so we're convinced that 30 hours is a good number for the regular battery. So we take a simple random sample of 15 new batteries and we put them under continuous use. We've got the little monkey banging the cymbals, bouncing around on the floor. We put them under continuous use until the monkey stops beating his cymbals. And I hope you know what I'm talking about. And so the significance test is based on the following hypothesis. First of all, the null hypothesis is that the mean of those batteries is 30 hours. The alternate is that the mean is greater than 30 hours. That's what we hope to be able to prove, that the mean truly is more than 30 hours. And so we do the calculation and we find the p-value is 0.0276. Okay, so hang with me about calculating the p-value. We'll get to that. We will. But for right now, I just want us to understand what it means when we do get to it. Because truly calculating it is something you've already done before. You've already done this now. You just didn't realize you were doing it. But I want us to concentrate on understanding and interpreting the result before we start going through the mechanics. Okay. So, part A, what conclusion can you make for the significance level of alpha equals 0.05? Okay, so let's go back. Look down here at the bottom. Look down here at the bottom. If the p-value is less than alpha, we reject the null hypothesis and conclude in favor of the alternative. Okay, so our alpha level here is 0.05. 0.0276 is less than that. So ultimately, our conclusion is this is a statistically significant result at the 5% significance level. There is evidence to reject the null hypothesis and conclude in favor of the alternate hypothesis. Okay. Now I'm going to show you some precise language, and quite honestly, it would do you well if you just took some time and you practice writing all of your responses like this, use this as a template. And if you write your responses this way, I'm convinced you'll get full credit. Okay. So here's the, I guess, quote unquote, textbook response. Since the p-value 0.0276 is less than alpha equals 0.05, the sample result is statistically significant at the 5% level. In other words, it's statistically unlikely to occur by random chance at the 5% level. We have significant or sufficient evidence to reject the null hypothesis and conclude that the deluxe AAA batteries last longer than 30 hours. Okay, so the last part of that statement is concluding in favor of the alternate hypothesis. Now the question is, what conclusion would you make for a significance level of 0.01? Okay, well, notice that 0.0276 is greater than 0.01. So let's go back to this box here. The p-value is greater than alpha, so we fail to reject the null hypothesis, cannot conclude in favor of the alternative. So what does that look like in the context of these AAA batteries? Since 0.0276 is greater than 0.01, the sample result is not statistically significant at the 1% level. In other words, it's not unlikely to occur simply by random chance. And I think what's hard to absorb here is that we're using a double negative, not unlikely is unfortunately not, we can't say that it is likely. I know that in grammatical terms, not unlikely means the same thing as likely, but here is in statistics, we can't say that it's likely to occur. We can only say it's not unlikely to occur by random chance. We do not have enough evidence to reject the null hypothesis in this case. Therefore, we cannot conclude that they last longer than 30 hours. Maybe they do. There's just not enough evidence to say that they do. Okay. So this page, and so now when you get ready to take the test on the 22nd, you can have this template, at your fingertips. And I'm rather convinced that you'll have to answer a question like this on your test. So I think it's a really, really good idea to get comfortable with this template in terms of the way we answer it. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to stop let's take a look at our textbook. I want us to look through some of the questions that we started talking about, I guess, on Tuesday. So on Tuesday, we asked a question about left-handedness, and we proposed a null and alternate hypothesis for handedness in a study. So if you open your textbook to page 546 and look at question 11, it's kind of a continuation of that study. So what we're going to do is just kind of dig into those questions one more step, and then we'll go from there. So for those of you who don't have your textbook, let me read the question. So Simon did a simple random sample, or in his simple random sample, 16 of the students were left-handed. And remember, he did a simple random sample of 100 students. So 16 out of 100 students were left-handed. A significance test yields a p-value of 0.2184. So A, interpret this result in context. And let's see. So we don't we don't have a particular significance level that we're comparing this to. So we're not comparing it to 5% or 1%, but it does not matter in this case because his p-value is greater than either 5% or 1%. So the p-value is high. So ultimately, we would say that this is a statistically significant result. And we would say that the chance of, there's a 21.84% chance of finding a sample of 100 people with a value of p hat that is as far from 0.12 as the sample value in either direction. And so do they provide convincing evidence against the null hypothesis? And here's what we would conclude. Since this p-value is high, there is not enough evidence to reject the null hypothesis. Something that happens over 20% of the time just by chance is not strong evidence against the null hypothesis. So the null hypothesis that we came up with was that the proportion of students in his school that were left-handed is 0.12. So we cannot reject that hypothesis. We can't say that it's true. We just can't reject it. Okay. Now, I will say this: when the question is asked in terms of a particular significance level, say at the 5% or the 1%, our answer will be crafted in that context, just like the last example I showed you. Also, at the end here, I will send you, I typed these out, first of all, so that it would be faster for us to get through. But also, after class is over, I will send you a hard copy of these responses for questions 11, 12, and 13, so that you can use them as templates for the ones I'm going to ask you to do, 13, 14, and 15, which I think follow along with what we did on Tuesday. Okay. So you may have questions. Hold on to those for a minute until we get through all of these, and then I'll try to answer all of your questions at one time. So now let's look down at question 12. And the context there was a survey of 1,028 teenagers said that 72% of teens said they seldom or never argue with their friends. So Yvonne did a simple random sample of 150 students at her school. And in that simple random sample, 96 students said they rarely or never argued with friends. A significance test yielded a p-value of 0.029. Okay, so now we see a p-value that is less than 5%. And so that's when the alarm bells should start ringing. Now, the question in this context does not give us a significance level to test against. We're just talking in general terms here. So let's see what we would conclude for part A there. If the proportion of students at Yvonne's school who say they rarely or never argue with friends is really 0.72, there is a 2.91% chance of finding a sample of 150 students with a value of p hat that is far from 0.72 as hers. You'll hold on for just a second. I'll wait.
Did he eat?
Yes.
He ate lunch.
Yeah.
A whole lunch.
Yeah, I think so.
He says chips.
Okay. Well, he was eating. No, hold on. He was eating whatever was out there. I don't know what was. I didn't give him anything more.
Okay. Come on, buddy. What did you think?
I'm sorry. So the p hat that Yvonne would have gotten is 96 over 150. And that value, I'm sorry, is 96 divided by 150, 0.64. Okay. So even though that is less than since that is less than 0.72, there's only a roughly 3% chance of getting another sample or any sample of 150 students from her school with that value if 0.72 is really true. So let's get down to part B, which is, do they provide convincing evidence against the null hypothesis? And the answer here is yes. A result that rarely happens, or happens as rarely as 3% of the time, is evidence against the null hypothesis. But be careful. If the significance level is 5%, then we would say there is evidence against the null hypothesis. But if the significance level is only 1%, we would have to conclude that there is not evidence against the null hypothesis, even though the value here is pretty low. Our significance test is 1%. That's a really, really, really high standard. And so something that happens as often as 3% is above that. And so we would have to say there is not strong enough evidence to reject the null hypothesis. So this one is in that no man's land or that danger area where it could be rejected at the 5%, but it would not be rejected at the 1% level. Okay. So let's skip on down to the other question about attitudes. And this one was about a psychological test that measures the student's attitudes towards school. And so if I administered this test about AP Lit, I think I can judge your attitudes after our discussion. But, you know, maybe AP Stats just pulls it in the other direction. Maybe you have a little bit better attitude about stats. I don't know. Maybe you don't. So let's see. This was the college teacher performed a simple random sample of 45 students over 30. And so what did we get? The score, the 45 students scored 125.7. And the standard deviation was 29.8. A significance test yields a p-value of 0.101. Okay, so now we get a chance to talk about it against a certain value of alpha. So part A is interpret the p-value in context. So how would we interpret it? If the mean score on the test for older students is really 115, there is a 1% chance, a 1.01% chance of finding a sample of 45 students with a mean score of at least 125.7. Okay, so what that's saying is it's statistically unlikely to find a test that has a score this high if the true mean is really 115. However, it's still kind of in that gray area, so let's look and see what this would say. So we would, if the significance level were 0.05 or 5%, then we would reject the null hypothesis. But if the significance level alpha was 1%, we would fail to reject the null hypothesis because, I mean, it is barely over. I mean, barely over, but it is over. So we would still fail to reject the null hypothesis. And what we would say is there is not strong enough evidence at the 1% level to reject that the true mean is actually 115. But at the 5% level, we would say there is strong enough evidence to reject that the true mean is 115. And we would find that we would find in favor of the alternate hypothesis that it is greater than 115 at the 5% level, but at the 1% level, we would not. Okay, so let me do this and see if there are any questions. Let me just stop presenting. And let me just ask you, do we have any questions about that?
No.
No? Okay. All right. So here's what I want you to do for tomorrow. Look at questions 14, 15, and 16. Those go back to the ones that you looked at for Tuesday. and you'll answer parts A and B, just like we did here. And I will send you that, the responses for 11, 12, and 13. I'll send those to you as soon as class is done. And you can use those as examples. You can use the notes that I've already provided as kind of a template. And I do want you to get in the habit of using those templates as guides. Don't try this out as a creative writing exercise, because you can stumble off the path if you're not careful. So we want to kind of stick to the outline really, really closely in your responses. Okay. All right. Any questions here before we sign off? Well, guys, I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Tomorrow, we will talk about type 1 and type 2 error. You have those notes already. If you're going to look ahead, concentrate on just looking at the very first slide. If of all of the open response questions that I've read, and I've read practically every open response question that's been on every test since 1997 when the first test was given, I have never seen an open response question ask questions beyond that first slide. But I do think that there's a good possibility that you might need to answer a question about type 1 and type 2 error. And if you understand the first slide, you'll be fine. And so that's what we'll talk about tomorrow. And we'll spend most of our time talking about more examples. And because I really think these things are hard to talk about in generalized terms. They're much easier to understand when we have a concrete question in front of us, like test scores on an attitudes test, or how many people are left-handed, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. All right, guys. Well, I'll see you again tomorrow, and good luck. If you have further questions, don't hesitate to ring out. We'll see you tomorrow.
See ya.